Thank you. Thank you, and I would also offer a welcome to everyone for our 109th quarterly meeting. I wanted to at first say it's so nice to see everyone in person, and am happy that so many of us were able to make it here. Here, as far as ACCV members and commissioners present, are myself, Kathleen Gaffney, and John Howie. And then on the telephone, we have Tina Tan and Martha Toomey. And I just wanted to do a double check really quick to see if Alexandra Stewart is on the line with us. And if Cody Meisner is on the call with us. Hopefully they'll be able to join us later. We do have a quorum present, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to all the ex officio members who are here and for the resources and support that they offer this group. Before we move forward, I wanted to mention that the work group actually submitted recommendations to the Secretary, to Secretary Azar. And Secretary Azar did respond. I wanted to read that response. It says, Secretary Azar has asked me to thank you for your letter regarding the Advisory Commission on Childhood Vaccines recommendations supporting an increase in the number of special masters and or funding resources for the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and to respond directly to you. Please be assured that these recommendations will receive careful review within the department. The ACCV's advice and recommendations for improving the VICP play a vital role in our public health efforts. I appreciate your commitment in the area and look forward to continuing to work with you on the important vaccine issues facing our nation. A similar response has been sent to Cody Meisner, who co-signed your letter, and that letter was signed by Dr. George Segunas, administrator. So there's been some great work by our work group, and wanted to just make sure that everyone knew that that has been received. Where we would like to go next is to receive public comments on agenda items. I would remind the public that at this point in the agenda, it is just public comments on agenda items. There will be a point in the program later where there will just be public comments. So operator, are you able to see if there are any listeners who would like to make public comments on the agenda items?
Yes, one moment and I will check on that. If anyone would like to make a comment, please dial *1 and record your first and last name. One moment, please. I'm showing no comments at this time.
Thank you. Our next item of business is to move on to approval of the minutes. We have September and December meeting minutes from 2018 that need to be approved. Can we start with the September 28th meeting minutes that were sent out? Are there any changes that we need to make to those minutes? Hearing none, can there be a motion to approve the September 2018 meeting minutes as they were dispersed? Kathleen moves. Can I get a second?
I'll second, Martha.
Thank you, Martha. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And are there any opposed? Okay.
Did I just hear Alexandra's voice on the...
Yes.
Hi, Alexandra.
Alexandra.
Welcome.
Aye.
Aye.
Let's next go to the December 2018 minutes. Are there any corrections to those meeting minutes? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the December 2018 minutes?
So moved.
I second.
So I have
Martha.
Tina, I think, making the motion. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then Martha as the second. All in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? All right, thank you. So those are unanimously approved. The next item of business is a report from Dr. Narayan Nair from the Division of Injury Compensation Programs. Dr. Nair?
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to provide you this update, and it's great to see everyone in person, including our guest. So some highlights of today's meeting. You'll receive my update, and then that'll be followed by an update by the Department of Justice Vaccine Litigation Office, and then there'll be updates from ACCV ex officio members, including FDA, CDC, NIH, and the National Vaccine Program Office. And then there'll be an update from the ACCV work group. So to start the DICP update, this slide illustrates the number of petitions filed, and this is up to date as of March 1st, 2019. And as a reminder, we're going by the federal fiscal year calendar, which begins October 1st and concludes September 30th. And so you can see historically the average annual number of petitions filed from the period of fiscal year 2009 to 2013 was 427. By 2014, that number had increased to 633, and you can see this subsequent increase to the point that by 2017, we received a total of 1,243 number of petitions. 2018, we received 1,238, and this year, as of March 1st, we have 508 petitions that we've received. So this slide just basically graphically plots out the numbers that I just discussed. And essentially what we have is from our historic average, a nearly threefold increase in the number of petitions that we've received. And that stayed relatively stable between fiscal year 2018 and 2017. This illustrates the 5-year trend in the number of claims filed versus administrative funding. You can see in 2014, we had 633 claims that were filed. The administrative funding was $6.46 million. This is funding just for HRSA to administer the program. As you recall, the VICP consists of 3 different federal entities, including the court and the Department of Justice, as well as HRSA. The funding I'm discussing here is just HRSA's funding to administer the program. In 2013, the number of claims filed was 803. That was a 27% increase from the previous year. Our funding increased 16%, $7.5 million. In 2016, the number of claims filed was 1,120. That was a 39% increase from the previous year. Our administrative funding remained stable. In 2017, we received 1,243 claims. That was an 11% increase. And our budget remained relatively stable. We had a 3% increase in $7.75 million. In 2018, the claims remained stable at 1,238. The administrative funding was $9.2 million. That was a 19% increase. Our funding for this fiscal year is stable at $9.2 million, and we're on track. We have 508 claims filed. Difficult to predict, but we're on track to either equal or surpass the number of claims that we received the last couple of fiscal years. So because of this dramatic increase that we've seen in recent years in the number of claims, we are limited in terms of resources in reviewing those. And so this slide illustrates the number of claims that are awaiting review as of March 4th. And these are claims that have been filed with the program with medical records that are awaiting review by medical officers here in HRSA. This doesn't include claims that have been already reviewed and are awaiting adjudication. So I just want to make that clear. This is basically represents HRSA's backlog. 2017, the claims that were filed in that fiscal year that had medical records have been reviewed. We don't have any claims awaiting review. 2018, we have 371 claims that are awaiting reviews. 2019, we have 66 claims awaiting review. for a total of 742 claims that are awaiting review. So what this essentially means is a backlog of approximately 9 months before a claim, between the time a claim is filed with medical records and when we can take up that review by our medical officers based on the staffing that we have available. This next slide shows the award amounts that are paid as of March 1st, 2019. I'm not going to go through every single number here, but just cover the last couple of years. So fiscal year 2018, nearly $200 million was awarded to petitioners, and attorney's fees, nearly $27 million. Fiscal year 2019, $100 million have been awarded as of March 1st, and $10 million for attorney's fees and costs. That first number was the petitioner awards. And then now I was going to cover the number of adjudications. Again, I won't go through each year, but covering last fiscal year, we had 538 claims that were compensable, 188 that were dismissed for a total of 726. And fiscal year 2019 thus far, 149 compensable, 36 dismissed for a total of 185. And to review the adjudication claims from fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2019, these are up to date as of March 6th. I wanted to just comment, some of these numbers, particularly the presentation that follows me by DOJ, some of the numbers don't quite align. There's a couple of reasons. One is the time frame that we look at is a little bit different, and secondly, we're pulling these reports from different data sources, and sometimes the data entry lags behind in certain cases. So the numbers might be off by 1 or 2, you might note, in certain cases. But in FY 2017, we had 696 claims that were compensable. Of those, 26% or 183 were concession. Court decisions were 26 or 4%, and settlements represented the majority, negotiated settlement of 487. 183 claims were not compensable. For 2018, we had 538 that were compensable, 35% or 189 were concession, and the court decision was 30 or 6%, and settlement was 319 or 59%. Non-compensable was 188. And thus far in 2019, 165 claims have been compensable, 55 were concession, and 8 were court decision, 102 have been settlements. And again, that is as of March 6th. The trust fund, which pays the administrative cost of the program and also pays for petitioners' awards and attorney's fees, the balance as of December 31st, 2018 was $3.8 billion. From October 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2018, the excise tax revenue was $56 million. The interest was $20 million. The total income, $76 million. And the interest as a percentage of total income was 27%. And the source for this data is the U.S. Treasury Bureau, which administers the trust fund. Other activities that we've been involved with, we've discussed the notice of proposed rulemaking. This is to add the category of vaccines recommended for pregnant women to the vaccine injury table. This was legislation that was passed by Congress after a recommendation by the ACCV to cover this category. The comment period for this federal regulation ended October 1st. We received 49 comments, and they're being reviewed, and we hope to issue a response to comments in our final rule. So as always, we have the website, which provides information on ACCV meetings, presentations, and minutes, and this website is listed here. And contact information for people that wish to participate in our meetings or provide public comment. There's Annie Herzog's contact information. And then to conclude, I always like to highlight the activities of HRSA. We're one program of many that's in HRSA. There's a number of different programs, including those that provide care for HIV, and also community health centers for people without insurance or uninsured, organ donation, poison control to help deal with the opioid epidemic. There's a lot of different programs I don't have time to mention, but I encourage people to visit the website or sign up for the HRSA e-news to learn about the great work that's taking place among some of our programs here. And that concludes the slideshow, but I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners?
I have a question, Dr. Nair. Going back to slide 8.
Is this John? I can't
Yeah,
hear who
sorry,
it
this
is.
John Howie.
Okay, hi, John.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, slide, which one?
8.
8?
So it looks to me, if I'm reading this right, that the number of adjudications is actually decreasing since about 2016. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct, and I think I can't comment on, obviously adjudications go through the court. The court, by statute, is limited in the number of special masters they have, but without a doubt, the backlog that we have here at HRSA is playing a role in reducing the number of adjudications.
Well, that's kind of what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Is there any insight as to why? I mean, obviously the court's going to do what the court's going to do, but is the backlog having an impact on the courts, to your knowledge?
Sure, that's my understanding that it is. The first step before a case can be adjudicated is for us to review it, and unfortunately we haven't had the staff to review these as they're filed.
Other questions? I had a question on slide 7. I wonder if we could go back one. In the 2 columns, so the second column is petitioner awards and the third is attorney's fees and costs. So the attorney's fees and costs are completely separate from what the petitioner's award is. Is that correct? Or is, let's say on the last line, fiscal year 2019, is that $10 million in attorney's fees and costs coming out of the $100 million for the petitioners, or is it completely separate?
It is a separate that's determined by the court. So essentially in almost all cases, the petitioner doesn't have to pay any attorney's fees. Those are covered by the program, regardless of whether compensation is received or not.
And then that was my next question, actually. So on the attorney's fees and costs, are those for fiscal year 2019 only in the cases where the petitioner received an award, or are those attorney fees and costs also what was paid out for maybe a petitioner who did not receive compensation?
Yeah, the latter. So if a petitioner receives compensation or not, the attorney's fees are covered as long as the court determines that the case was brought on a reasonable basis. And I did want to allow Andrea or Catherine to chime in to make sure since that's more of a legal question, make sure that oh, thanks.
Yes, okay. They are nodding their heads.
So yeah, it's taken me a few years, but I have learned some of the legal
This is Martha. I think that's a cogent statement that this does not come out of the petitioner's award, because that opens it up to people who otherwise might not be able to afford to be petitioners. I think that's one of the positive parts of the program. I know it was very helpful for us. We could not have afforded to have we couldn't have participated in the compensation program. So I think that's an important thing to note, that if somebody does file and become a petitioner, they will not be paying legal bills. That's an important fact. And thank you, Dr. Nair. It's been a delight to know you these last 4 years. I've learned a lot.
Well, thank you for, Martha, your service and everything you provided. The public input is so important for this program and for this commission, and so we're very grateful that with the time and with all the competing demands that you have, that you've been able to devote yourself to helping us.
It's been my pleasure.
Are there any further questions for Dr. Nair? Okay, as we move forward to our report from the Department of Justice, Catherine Reeves will be doing the presentation. As Catherine's coming up front, I just wanted to mention that on the letter that was received from Dr. George Segunas, I wanted to make sure that the public on the line and listening knew that the copy of the ACCV recommendation and the Secretary's response are both available online on the HRSA website. I was able to find that by just Googling ACCV reports and recommendations, and it came right up. So it'll say, this is what the 2018 ACCV recommendation was that was submitted on December 19th of 2018, and then right beneath it, it has the Secretary's response to the ACCV recommendation, and it was dated January 28th, 2019.
That on your TV years ago, up the screen, and that never seems to happen anymore. Peach up, peach down? Okay, I'll try to do that. Hopefully I won't screw it up. You will. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with information from the Office of Vaccine Litigation at the Justice Department. So the first slide is showing you the number of petitions that have been filed during the reporting period, which is between November 16th of last year and February 15th of this year. So we've had 307 petitions filed during that period. 10 were for minors and 297 were for adults, continuing with the trend that we've been seeing for several years now, that most of the cases being filed in the program are for adults. I'll note that this is 68 fewer petitions than have filed during the last reporting period, but I will also note that we, based on our recording of the number of petitions that are being filed, we're at the same level as we were this time last year. So we're not seeing an uptick in the number of petitions being filed for the fiscal year, which we're hopeful will continue because, as Dr. Nair pointed out, there has just been a staggering number of claims filed over the last several fiscal years, and we don't really have the resources currently to deal with them in real time. The next slide is showing the number of petitions that were adjudicated for the reporting period, which is 153. This is 28 fewer than the last reporting period. If there's, I don't know what the reason for the decrease in the number of adjudications is, except for the fact that we were shut down for 5 weeks during the government shutdown. Most of my staff was furloughed during that period, except for those that were accepted due to court order. For example, we did proceed with any scheduled hearings that were scheduled during the furlough. Many people in my office worked without pay during that 5-week period. But that may explain why there are fewer adjudications for this current reporting period than the last. You'll see that most of the cases that were adjudicated that were not conceded were resolved via negotiated settlement. The next slide is just showing how many petitions were voluntarily withdrawn, which were 4. I think that's a couple fewer than the last reporting period. Then this next slide is showing the cases that were decided by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. There were 3 decisions in cases appealed by the petitioners, and there was an appeal that had been filed by the government that was dismissed. The next slide is showing the pending cases at the Federal Circuit. There are the ones that are in yellow are ones that were filed since the last reporting period. Most of these were filed by petitioners. The reason, the basis for the appeal or the decision that was the basis for the decision that was appealed is in the parenthetical following the name of the case. There's 1 appeal pending at the Federal Circuit that was filed by the respondent. And then at the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, we have lots of appeals that were decided since the last reporting period. They're all listed there. Currently there were no decisions filed in cases that were appealed to the Court of Federal Claims by the government. This slide shows pending cases at the Court of Federal Claims, most of which were filed by petitioners. There were 2 filed by the government, and those cases are pending, meaning that there's not been a decision in those cases yet. There is an argument on Monday, March 11th, at the Federal Circuit in the case of RK versus HHS, which is an attorney fee-based appeal filed by the petitioners. And then this is the first of several slides that shows the cases that were resolved via settlement, adjudicated with a stipulation filed for the reporting period, lists the alleged vaccine or the alleged vaccine causing injury, and the amount of time it took for the case to be resolved from the time the petition was filed to the time the settlement was finalized. And these slides show, as usual, that most cases are resolved within less than 2 years of the petition being filed. Our average processing time for settlements is 1 year and 10 months. You can see from these slides that most of the cases involve the alleged injury of SERVA, shoulder injury related to vaccine administration. And then this is the appendix that we provide at every meeting that is definitions for terms that we use for your information. And then this is a flow chart that shows how petitions are processed in the Office of Special Masters. And then this shows the various levels of appeal for Vaccine Act cases. They start out in the Office of Special Masters, and they can go all the way to the Supreme Court. We've had 2 cases go to the Supreme Court in the history of the program. And then this is a flow chart of the appeals process. I believe that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
This is Martha. I have 2 questions. As you know, every meeting I thank you for the glossary of terms. It's very thoughtful of you. Not everybody does that, and it's very nice of you. Thank you. When you said the average adjudication is 1 year, 10 months, is this after HRSA? This isn't a total time. It's after you have received it. Am I understanding that correctly? That first it goes to HRSA and they have the backlog. Your average time of 1 year, 10 months is with you guys.
No,
not.
It's the average time for processing from the date the petition was filed.
Okay.
So
and
before HHS has reviewed it, before the case has been reviewed at DOJ, before the court has gotten involved in the case, from the date that the petition was filed by a petitioner to the date that the settlement, the stipulation has been filed in the case.
And my second question is, you mentioned that there were 2 cases that went to the Supreme Court. Could you, who won on those? How, and you know, can you just give us a little synopsis on each case? Nothing big, just
Sure. There were 2 cases. There was a case called White Cotton, and the government prevailed in that case at the Supreme Court. And then there was a more recent case called Chlor, where the government did not prevail. White Cotton involved an allegation of an encephalopathy resulting from vaccination. So it was the appeal was based on the decision on entitlement to compensation. And then the Chlor case involved a discrete attorney's fees issue because of the fact that the underlying claim was determined to have been untimely filed. There was an issue as to whether or not attorney's fees should be awarded because of the basis for the dismissal of the underlying claim was jurisdictional, and the Supreme Court disagreed with us that that should mean that the attorney's fees would not be paid.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
I've got a couple of questions. This is John Howie. If you flip to the very last line of this adjudicated settlements chart,
Sure.
I see that there was a GDS case that was adjudicated within 2 months.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
When these charts are put together, is there a reason that we couldn't include the name of the petitioner?
Well, there is a reason for it, and that is that all of these settlements are reported on the court's website because there's a decision issued in every single case.
Right.
Adopting the stipulation, and all of those are posted on the court's website. So we agreed several years ago, more than several years ago, that we would provide this information just as more tracking the vaccines that are being alleged as causing injury, the types of injuries, and the processing time. So we didn't include the additional information of the case name, just simply because this, as you can imagine, it's quite time-consuming to put this together for every quarterly meeting. So, plus we do have privacy concerns about disclosing the names of the cases in this context, since we know they're published elsewhere.
Okay. The other question, these are just on settlements, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there any tracking that's done on all cases, not just settlements from start to finish? I know that we pay attention to that internally, but I don't know if it's publicly tracked anywhere. Okay, because I would assume that those are going to be taking a lot longer than settlements are.
Yeah, I mean, because cases, depending on the circumstances of the case, if it goes to hearing and if it's appealed, and there could be cases that it would look like it took 10 years to resolve them because there were appeals all the way up to the federal circuit or beyond. Like, for example, the White Cotton case, I can't remember how many years it took before that was finally adjudicated. So there's the wide variances between, the time it takes to process something. We focused on settlements here because over 80% of the cases filed in the program are currently being settled. So that's the most predominant way that cases are resolved.
All right. The other question I had, is anybody tracking how long it's taking from conclusion of the damages aspects, entitlement and damages aspects of the case, to conclusion of the fee applications as well? Because I know that's becoming a concern on the petitioner's bar, is the amount of time that it's taking to get rulings on fee applications.
I don't think we track that. The court may track it, I'm not sure. But no, because it's, they're on separate tracks. And because there's interim attorney's fees available now, that complicates the ability to track it. But no, we don't track that statistic.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Are there other questions for Catherine? Catherine, I wondered, since you're on this slide right here, if, I know sometimes we talk in acronyms, and you mentioned what SERVA stands for, GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome. There were some others that I wasn't entirely sure what they, CIDP.
That's chronic immune demyelinating polyneuropathy. Is that right, Narayan? Chronic inflammatory. I think sometimes it's also called chronic immune. But anyway, it's a disease that is very similar to GBS. It has very similar symptoms, but it's different. It's a distinct disease entity from GBS. Mostly SERVA.
Okay, we're good there. TM.
Transverse myelitis, which is a neurological demyelinating illness. SERVA, GBS, TM.
And then my final question may or not be related to what John asked, I'm not sure, but on slide number 6, you mentioned RK versus, it's under pending cases, appeals by petitioner, the RK versus HHS for attorneys' fees and costs.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, is that common that you would have a separate petition for attorneys' fees and costs? I guess I was under the impression that when the petitioner was awarded or was compensated, that the attorney fees and costs would be compensated at the same exact time, but it's a different petitioning process.
That's correct. Once the case is concluded, or in some cases, because the Federal Circuit has determined that our statute allows for interim attorney's fees awards, sometimes fee petitions are filed during the course of the litigation of the underlying claim. But typically, at the end of the case, once compensation has been awarded or the case has been denied, then the attorneys will file the attorneys for petitioner will file a petition for an award of attorney's fees and costs that's adjudicated separately from the underlying claim. It is considered part of the petitioner's compensation. The attorney's fees and costs checks are made payable to the petitioner and their attorney, but it's a separate adjudication, and as Dr. Nair mentioned and Martha reinforced, the petitioners cannot be charged any attorney's fees over and above what the court awards in a Vaccine Act case. That's in the statute. It's prohibited. Unfortunately, there have been times when that has happened in past years, and attorneys have been, very rarely, but attorneys have been prosecuted for doing that. But it's something that is very clear that petitioners cannot be charged attorney's fees over and above what the court awards to their attorney in the context of the Vaccine Act.
Thank you. Any final questions?
It's Martha. I just want to once again state that we use the word petitioner, but anyone who's listening to the meeting might not quite. The petitioner is the person who believes that they've been injured by a vaccine or their child has been injured by a vaccine who wants to get compensation. And so we use the word petitioner. That's the person, that would be my family or whatever. I just want people to know what a petitioner is, because it's such a lovely, antiquated legal term that we petition. And you're petitioning for help from the government. So people who are listening in, that's what that means.
All right, thank you.
Thank you again.
The next item on our agenda is a report from the ACCV work group, and that will be given by the work group chair, Martha Toomey.
Hello, good morning. Do we have the slide from Alexandra from this morning's work group meeting? Do we have that up?
Martha, I believe she sent an email. Alexandra, can you
I did send a sentence. I thought that tomorrow, are you working with that?
So, yeah, I did make some suggestions too, but I guess it would be whether you all are okay with it, whether the work group is okay with it. So,
Well, we haven't yet discussed that, have we?
No, but
so if you
It's
just
okay with, I mean, I did see it just now. It's fine with me.
fine with me.
Okay.
Okay. The work group has been designed to help come up with ways to make the actual petition process easier and more user-friendly. And we heard from our chair at the beginning of the meeting that we have requested additional funding for the court. This doesn't just come out of the blue. We've had judges have come to our meetings and asked for extra funding. We're not just asking for extra funding. It is, I wouldn't call it a crisis. I hate that word, but there is a backlog, and justice delayed is justice denied, and the backlog needs to be addressed. And we've heard this morning from several speakers that the backlog is a problem. So I was glad that we got a letter back from the Secretary, and I hope that there's some kind of fruition in the budgetary concerns. We also have been discussing ways to better organize the court, and we thought that maybe when people leave as petitioners, that there should be some type of an exit interview or something where people can tell how it went for them, what was wrong, what went right. And we have come up with some wording. The work group has voted on this, and we have some wording on a proposal that we would like the ACCV members to think about and vote on today, it would be a recommendation that would go to the Secretary. And Alexander, do you have it in front of you, or would you like me to read it?
It is not in front of me. Is the slide ready?
I have it in front of me if you want me to read it.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay. The VICP will develop, I think we should spell out VICP, please.
So Martha, that definitely will happen in the recommendation that goes to
Excellent.
the Secretary. So Annie is putting it up now. She is putting the file up.
Okay.
Just the email.
Okay, just the email. So it just be the wording.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
The VICP will develop the questionnaire, which is to be routinely administered to petitioners whose petitions have been adjudicated. Do we agree with that?
So Martha, I think, so what Annie has put up is the process work group recommends the development of an exit questionnaire to determine petitioners' opinions related to their experience with the program. The VICP will develop a questionnaire which is to be routinely administered to petitioners whose petitions have been adjudicated. So that's the language that Annie has up. So is that the language that the work group's okay with?
Yes.
Yes.
This is Beth. So I am part of that work group, so I'm a little more familiar with it. But Tina and Kathleen, I don't believe are part of that work group. Is that correct, Kathleen? So do you have any questions or need any further background information before we actually vote on whether or not to make this recommendation?
No, I'm fine.
Kathleen?
Things are prepared, we probably need to be sensitive to having them available in different languages.
I can't hear.
The petitioner has a different native, I'm sorry. I was just saying, as we discussed in a prior meeting, that as we prepare, or they prepare questionnaires, given some of the changing demographics, that we should consider the questionnaires available in various language, which the petitioner.
Yes, we have discussed that. It has to be ADA. It has to comply with ADA. It has to be in different languages, and I think there's a process that needs to. It's not as if we will be doing it. It would be a contractor who is an expert in these things, and we would take into account language and also the different ADA requirements.
So this is Tamara. So I had mentioned in the work group that generally, because we don't have the expertise in-house to develop surveys, that we would actually have to have a contractor to do it with expertise in developing surveys and expertise in administering it and doing the data analysis. So and all of that would be taken into consideration of whether or not the survey needs to be developed in different languages because it depends on the target audience. So all of that would be taken into consideration, and the ACCV would be consulted with regard to developing the statement of work for the contractor, as well as ultimately the methodology that's used to develop the survey questions. So ACCV would be involved and consulted with regard to the development of the questionnaire and administering it.
And this is Martha again. We had several long conversations about who the target audience should be. And today we came up with, from now on, it won't be anyone who had participated. It will be from now on. We were thinking of doing, the past 5 years, past year, but it's too cumbersome. So this morning we made the decision that the people who would be participating will be those people who adjudicate from now on.
Right, so we could add in there prospectively to say that it would be prospective.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Martha? Okay, before we do a vote, I just need to check to see if Cody Meisner is on the call. Or if Dino joined us. We have 6 members, 6 commissioners, so that is enough for a quorum. We can go ahead and hold a vote on this. So we are voting on whether or not to accept the work group recommendation as an ACCV, and that the ACCV then as a group would make this recommendation to the Secretary. All right, I'll do a roll call, so if you'll just tell me yes or no, that would be great. John Howie?
Yes.
Martha Toomey?
Yes.
Tina Tan?
Yes.
Kathleen Gaffney?
Yes.
Alexandra Stewart?
Yes.
And then me, Beth Luthi, is also a yes. So that's a unanimous vote from the ACCV that that recommendation will go forward to the Secretary. We are running about 30 minutes ahead of time. We're scheduled for a lunch break next. I noticed that Dr. McNeil is here. Is it okay if we go ahead and have Dr. McNeil present? Is there anyone opposed to having Dr. McNeil present next?
No.
No?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. McNeil.
Well, good morning, and this is the Immunization Safety Office update. My disclaimer. So the talk, as usual, is organized around an update on presentations from the February Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices that was held last week at CDC in Atlanta, and then also provided to you, and I have slides, but I won't dwell on them, selected publications from the Immunization Safety Office. So these are updates organized by vaccine work groups, and the influenza work group presented a summary of the current season with data through the 16th of February. The influenza activity for this season remains elevated. Most notifications are infections with the influenza A H1N1, the pandemic from 2009 strain, has predominated. However, they are seeing some H3N2 viruses in particularly the southeast regions in the more recent weeks. This is of note that about this time of year, WHO decides the strains to be included in the coming season, and this time there is a delay. They have not yet decided on the H3N2 component to be included in the next season's vaccines. It was mentioned at the meeting that the manufacturers, there's not much in the way of concern that the manufacturing will be delayed because of this, and WHO have a meeting scheduled for March 21st. More on that. This is information from monitoring. This is conducted by the U.S. Influenza Vaccine Effectiveness Network. The footnote identifies the 5 sites that comprise this network. They're the Kaiser Washington, Marshfield Clinic, University of Michigan, University of Pittsburgh, and Baylor University. This is information gained from outpatients aged 6 months and older with acute respiratory infections, that is cough, less than 7 days duration, and they conducted test negative design. So just to get into the data, the pooled results this season indicate 47% vaccine effectiveness against any influenza virus. It's slightly less against the H1N1 pandemic strain, and also less against the H3N2 component. When you look at it age stratified, in children actually it's doing better, 61% against any flu and 62% against H1N1. When you look at adults 18 to 49, it drops 37% against any flu and 45% against H1N1. In adults older than 50, neither of those estimates for any influenza or H1N1 was statistically significant. The manufacturer, Securus of Afluria quadrivalent, presented information about a phase 3 randomized observer-blinded comparator-controlled study that was conducted during 2016 and 17, and their vaccine the results were positive. It demonstrated non-inferior immunogenicity against a licensed comparator quadrivalent vaccine, and safety and tolerability were similar to the comparator quadrivalent. They looked at fever greater than 99.5, and you can see the numbers. There were no febrile convulsions reported in the first 7 days, and severe related fever was similar between the two groups. And that vaccine was FDA approved in October last year for children 6 to 59 months on the basis of that clinical trial. The vaccine safety, ISO had a study with which was led in the vaccine safety data link, and the principal investigator was Jim Donoghue from Marshfield Clinic, and this was the third study. I think we've presented information in previous commission meetings about this sequence of studies. So this is the final study that looked at a miscarriage following inactivated influenza vaccine. There was an original study that was conducted early in the 2000s. I think it was like 2005-06 season that showed no association. Then there was a more recent study that I've presented previously, results that did show an association, and it was peculiar because the association was related to receipt the prior season of an H1N1 containing vaccine. So this was the definitive study to answer that question of, is there an association between spontaneous abortion and receipt of inactivated influenza vaccine? And as you can see, there was no significant association found in these 3 seasons that were studied. The one that found the association previously was only 2 seasons. The odds ratios were less than or close to 1 in all the risk windows. The risk window of interest previously was 1 to 28 days following receipt of the vaccine. There was no significant association in season-specific analysis, and the findings support the safety of influenza vaccine in early pregnancy. Related to influenza vaccines for young children, there have been some licensure changes. Afluria trivalent and Afluria quadrivalent that we mentioned earlier, the age indication has expanded down. Previously it was 5 years and above, and now it's 6 months and above, which is consistent with other influenza vaccines. There's also licensure allows the use of a smaller volume, so there's a volume difference that providers have to observe closely. I won't go further on that. As far as flu zone quadrivalent, this was previously received in a 0.25 ml dose, but I think in the there was data presented earlier to ACIP, and then in January this year, the FDA licensed this larger volume dose, the 0.5 ml dose for all ages. So even the children 6 months and above can receive either the 0.5 ml dose or the 0.25 ml. Moving to human papilloma virus vaccine. I remember mentioning to the Commission last meeting that there's been a lot of discussion by ACIP about the fact that the recommended ages are slightly different from males to females, and also there's been interest in extending the age up to what's called the mid-adult age, which is up to 49 years. So I think they've held off on harmonizing the upper dose until they wrestle with this question whether there should be a recommendation for extending it into this mid-adult age range. Just summarizing some of the information presented, there is a rapid acquisition of HPV in the late teens and early 20s. Progression from incident infection to cervical precancer can be within a few years. Over 90% of infections clear, and 30 to 40% of cervical precancers clear also. The time from progression to precancer, of precancer to cervical cancer can be up beyond 20 years. And this has been estimated from statistical analysis. The age at cervical precancer detection depends on screening, and it's difficult to estimate the age at causal infection from epidemiological surveillance data. Less is known about the natural history of HPV at non-cervical sites and about progression from infection to cancer in males. So there are significant challenges estimating the burden of disease due to incident infections in mid-adults from empiric data. So this is a really thorny issue. This is the summarizing consideration for the vaccine recommendation for adults. The current vaccination program predicted to reduce the HPV burden of disease substantially, and this is really very significant. 82% reduction in anogenital wart diagnosis and 59% in cervical cancers over 100 years. Extending the vaccination to 45-year-old males and females is predicted to produce only small reductions in the burden of disease. And they've been looking, there's actually 3 groups who've been looking at cost effectiveness of mid-adult vaccination recommendation, and the models that they have come forward with have identified some significant problems, and they're not really very consistent. And as you can see, the models are highly sensitive to the level of natural immunity after infection and the rate of progression to the cervical lesions. And as we mentioned, that's very difficult to come by solid information. Also, its cost effectiveness in their models is very dependent on the historical vaccination coverage. And as you know, coverage has had its problems, particularly with the third dose with the current recommendation. So the overall value and acceptability from these models looks as if it may only be moderate. Also there is, they have done some surveys. There were some results presented about willingness to receive the vaccine in this mid-adult age group, and men who have sex with men are showing interest and would be receptive to that recommendation. But also those surveys showed that there's significant numbers of people who by marriage or being in monogamous relationships or having a history of only few sex partners would not, they would value that recommendation or not value it as highly. So in summary, the ACCP work group will continue to review these economic models and they will complete the process that ACCP now goes through with all its recommendations, which is the grade analysis, and then they will now have this more detailed evidence to recommendations framework. And the June meeting is scheduled maybe for a vote on that. Moving on, this was a vaccine I see the Commission heard about from the FDA representative at the last meeting. VAXELIS is a pediatric hexavalent vaccine. It contains, you can see it contains DTaP, IPV, hepatitis B, and the PRP, OMP, HIP component. So actually it's two companies who have combined manufacture of this vaccine, given in 3 doses at 2, 4, and 6 months, and was licensed last December. So there is consideration whether it should be included under the VFC program, and should there also be a preferential recommendation for high-risk American Indian, Alaskan Native children to receive this vaccine. There is a tentative vote, VFC vote planned for June 2019, and a MMWR publication to follow. The supply is not predicted to be available until at least next year. It has been evaluated in phase 3 clinical studies, and it's demonstrated robust immunogenicity and acceptable safety consistent with its component vaccines. Also, it's already used in the EU with over 1.5 million doses distributed since May 2017, and with no unexpected safety signals. There was also, as part of that presentation, or following closely, was a presentation about Haemophilus influenza type B in Native American children. To remind the Commission that hip disease rates are higher among Native American children than others. There are 2 conjugate vaccines available. One has the tetanus toxoid PRP, the other one has the OMP PRP that I mentioned in VAXELIS. The American Academy of Pediatrics has made a preferential recommendation for the PRP OMP because the risk of invasive hip disease, there is this risk at younger ages. The Indian Health Service has recommended a preference for PEDVAX hip, and this is on all accounts more efficacious vaccine. Unfortunately, I mentioned it's given, the VAXELIS is given in 3 doses, 2, 4, and 6 months, and there is currently no information on post-dose 1 immunogenicity. So that is a priority to determine that, hopefully, in high-burden Native American. Important and would inform making changing gears to pneumococcal vaccines. This has been also very interesting dilemma. In the 2014 recommendation of ACIP was for adults 65 and above to receive B13, and remember it was with in a sequence with the polysaccharide vaccine, that polysaccharide 23-valent vaccine, and this was based on invasive pneumococcal disease, pneumonia, mortality, and safety. So this is a recommendation that committee wanted to revisit in 2019. And there have been some new developments. One is that there are two new products in phase 3 trials. There's a PCV15 and a PCV20 that soon be licensed. So this is going to have an impact if there are changes to the current recommendations for PCV30. The other thing to note is that serotype 3, which actually is one of the 13 viruses in the PCV13 vaccine, is causing most of the remaining disease burden in the US and other countries who are using PCV13. So PCV13 may provide some level of direct protection against invasive pneumococcal disease and pneumonia caused by this, but it's not evident so far. Given vaccine effectiveness and PCV13 coverage to date, which is about 40%, there is some expectation that there would be population level impact, but again, it's not been seen as so far. There's no evidence of population level impact on this serotype 3 disease. So there's a high level of uncertainty about is there expected benefit against this particular serotype. The work group has been wrestling with this problem of is there a direct effect of the new adult PCV recommendation they made in 2014 on pneumonia and hospitalizations among these older adults? And this is very difficult to actually nail down because there has been remarkable effect because of the use of the vaccine in children. So the use in children has actually had a great impact on disease in others in the older age groups. PCV13 is effective against community-acquired pneumonia, non-healthcare associated CAP, community-acquired pneumonia, and lobar pneumonia. The vaccine effectiveness for all-cause community-acquired pneumonia is between 6 and 11%. So you can see this is really rather disappointing. There is also a trial that's been done on PCV13 that showed only 8% vaccine effectiveness for CAP. So the question is still fairly open, and the committee with those new vaccines coming is on this. There was quite a bit of discussion about should perhaps they pull back on that recommendation at this point. So the policy question was, should the PCV13 that administered routinely to immunocompetent, this is not the immunocompromised adults, but the, consider the immunocompetent adults 65 and above in the context of the indirect effects from the pediatric use of the vaccine that's been seen to date. And this slide kind of summarizes reasons raised in favor of continuing routine PCV13 and reasons raised in favor of discontinuing. See that this is a really difficult issue to deal with. It's a problem for the committee that they make a recommendation, then if they were to pull back on this recommendation, and then a new vaccine comes out in a few years that's even better. Clinical trials, there was a lot of concern expressed by the provider community, pediatricians, that this is not what they'd like to hear. There is a category of recommendation which is called individual decision making, where the physician or the provider determines that the person would benefit from the vaccine, even though there's no official recommendation for the person in that age group to receive the vaccine. So that may be an option, but at this point, it was really just to bring the Commission's notice to this. More to come. Pneumococcal vaccine. Switching gears again, meningococcal B vaccines. Meningococcal B vaccines, you know, meningococcal B has been responsible for a number of college campus outbreaks. There are two currently licensed vaccines, Bexero and Trumemba. They differ in their dosing, and data was presented about the duration, really, of immunogenicity following primary series of these vaccines and the potential for administering booster doses. And on my second slide, the work group recommends that booster doses be given for persons at high risk due to medical issues. So there are people, these categories are people with complement component deficiencies, with particular complement inhibitor, pronounce it, monoclonal antibody preparation that's used for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, which these people are very susceptible to meningococcal B, and also people who have either functional or anatomic asplenia, and microbiologists who would be exposed to meningococcus. So these people should be recommended to receive a booster of B, and this would be first booster 1 year after the primary series and every 2 to 3 years. Persons at risk during one of those college outbreaks, some of the college students would have received perhaps the primary series, and a booster dose would be then recommended if 6 months or more have passed since that completion of the primary series, were there to be an outbreak in the college, on the college campus. So ACCV will vote on this issue at an upcoming so I won't dwell on the publications. They're included in your packet. There are a number of them. I don't think I did want to just go to our these are non-covered vaccines, so I was told the Commission was interested sometimes in hearing about other vaccines that ACCV has voted, and these were votes at the ACCV meeting. So this is really just for interest. the Japanese encephalitis work group presented its final evidence to recommendations, and votes were taken on use of the vaccine. This was a regular update of the ACCV recommendations for this vaccine. The ACCV now will review its recommendations every 5 years, and this was conducted the first time that this vaccine was reviewed under the evidence to recommendation. There are a couple of interesting points about the recommendations. So the standard schedule was to vaccinate day 0 and day 28, and under the new recommendations they've allowed the second dose to be given much sooner. So the schedule now for primary vaccination would be day 0 and as early as day 7. Of course, this is given to travellers and the military particularly, and this will facilitate for receiving both doses and missing the second dose. And let me see, the other one is the anthrax vaccine work group. Again, this is a vaccine that's given now mainly in the military or to first responders. The standard vaccine is AVA, anthrax vaccine adsorbed. The problem with it, so it's given as a pre-exposure prophylaxis, and it can be given in post-exposure mode in combination with 6 weeks of antibiotics. That's if there were to be an anthrax. The problem is that the schedule is very complicated. It's like 5 priming doses and then annual boosters, and this has been something that's been very, very difficult for the military and anyone else, first responders who want to receive the vaccine. Clinical trial was done at the CDC some years ago, which did show that potentially those doses in pre-exposure, the schedule could be reduced. And some other countries actually, their military has reduced the number of doses given in the schedule, and even the boosters to up to 3 years apart. So 2 things that came up at the meeting last week were there's the same manufacturer, Emergent Biosolutions, has made a adjuvanted version of the vaccine. Contains a CpG 7909 adjuvant. So this vaccine will go into the National Pharmaceutic Stockpile, where vaccines are until there is an event. And the plan is that gradually the stockpile of the current vaccine will be replaced by this new adjuvanted version of the vaccine, so that there is limited safety data, but this was more informational for the committee to know, and they have also been hearing about, as I said, reducing this very burdensome schedule. So there was a vote that persons who are not currently at high risk, so these would be, say, military people who received the priming series, pre-exposure priming series, and then they're potentially going to be deployed. So at that point, they would receive a booster dose, rather than currently what happens, which is they receive a booster dose every year. So this is, I think, is very welcome news that a booster dose may be given every 3 years to persons not currently at high-risk exposure who have been previously primed with the anthrax vaccine. So lastly, zoster vaccine. so there is, as you know, a new recombinant zoster vaccine, and this the ACRP recommends preferentially even that this be given, and that people who received the prior live vaccine, VZV, actually should receive this vaccine because it is so effective. There's been supply problems, though, and I think the supply problems are the CDC is doing what we call rapid cycle analysis, which is our way of prospectively looking at safety of new vaccines. And information was presented from our office about a very preliminary statistical signal for GBS among recipients of the vaccine. However, this information is still very, very preliminary. It's based only on 4 claims. And more work is being done. The sites in the vaccine safety data link that conduct the rapid cycle are actually going back to medical records to validate the diagnoses. And more work will be done to refine whether this is a true signal. So that the ACRP actually, as I've mentioned here, is also aware that the FDA look in a similar fashion, I believe, at the CMS data, and so they're looking in a separate system. Are they going to see a similar signal or not? And there is quite an intense effort, not only on GBS, but there's a range of pre-specified adverse events with this vaccine. With that rather lengthy presentation.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil. Are there any questions?
This is Martha. I have a question just because I was listening and I didn't understand quite what you were saying. On slide 15, you made an aside. It's not on the slide, but I got confused on the recommendation. You mentioned at the end of slide 15 that doctors would have individual, they would be able to decide individually if people would get this vaccine. I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that.
Yeah.
That it would be taken in an individual?
Well, the question was the recommendation was made in 2014 with the plan to review it in 2019. So they really wanted to know, is this recommendation working? Are people 65 and above benefiting from a broad recommendation all to receive the vaccine? And the problem is that there's been such a big effect indirectly from the vaccination of young children with the vaccine that teasing out a direct effect is very, very difficult. And it looks from the information on slide 14 as if there really is very little effect, direct effect of the recommendation. So ACRP have this dilemma. You're recommending a vaccine that may really not be having any benefit. And so the question is, do they then say, well, we've looked at the information we have to date, we are taking back our recommendation. And the problem with that is that it's a lot easier to make a recommendation. It's very difficult to take it back, particularly in the scenario where there are new vaccines coming soon. That clarifies that you can look at the information too and the pros and cons, which may make it clear too. But as a committee making recommendation, this is something that...
So I'm not a scientist, so I'm just asking silly questions, I'm sure. But so the situation is fluid. It can change. It can you can get a better vaccine, you can get a worse vaccine.
Yeah.
But there are people who are opting out, and so I guess one of your sides was that it would be up to the doctor to decide these things.
Yeah, so if they change the recommendation, instead of just cancelling it and saying, you know, we recommended it back in 2014, but now we looked at the data, it doesn't work so well, so we are saying you don't have to have that recommendation. They could make a recommendation, like an interim recommendation that says, we're not sure about whether it's working so well in the recommended age group. However, we would advise individual decision-making by the practitioner.
That's sort of surprising to me because parents don't get that. We're not being given that. We're not being given an individual. I'm confused by your statement. Because we're not. It's a federal mandate. We have to do it.
It's really directed at the physician. So the physician would know the patient and know their medical history, and from that they would make a decision, even though there's no information, you know, really supporting a blanket recommendation. All people 65 and above, when you see them, you should recommend this vaccine. If you know that individual patient and you feel they would benefit, then the ACCP might go to that kind of recommendation. However, I don't know, maybe Dr. Nair or someone else who was at the meeting might get a flavour, but the people who represented the providers seemed pretty adamant that they did not want to see the recommendation withdrawn. And,
but to leave it up to an individual doctor and the
individual doctor and the individual patient, yes.
And so that's just this one vaccine conversation, yes. Because it's a federal mandate, and parents are losing their children because they would like to talk individually to their doctor and take these issues individually. And so I'm kind of confused why this one vaccine is being afforded that luxury of individual choice, well, and others aren't.
Yes.
It's confusing.
Yes, I agree. And policy making is a very difficult area to be in, I think. You know, particularly when there are all these variations and things happening, new vaccines coming. You know, the evidence, though, I think on the whole, with the influenza, even though, as you said, you know, seasonally it does, the efficacy certainly does fluctuate depending on the strains, and it's very, very difficult to, you know, for the WHO to come up with what is the recommended strains we're going to put in the vaccine in advance, you know, I mean, the season. So there are lots and lots of issues. The thing with the flu, though, is there is efficacy. In this case, though, I think those numbers were rather bad. The vaccine effectiveness for all-cause community-acquired pneumonia in this age group of 6 to 11%. I don't think we've seen flu in that.
I just was confused to hear that there's a vaccine where individual choice with the doctor, with the doctor is encouraged. Was confused. That's all, because it tends to, as you know, the number one conversation parents are having about vaccines is individual choice.
Yeah, Martha, this is Narayan. I think those are great questions. This was a real complicated issue. The vaccine, I did want to make clear, this pneumococcal, this PCV13 vaccine, works extremely well with children, and pneumonia, that it prevents, can be devastating for kids. And it's also devastating for adults, particularly in that 65 and older group. So when they looked at the safety of the vaccine and how it worked, you know, it had been, and it is currently recommended for kids. They went ahead and added it as a recommendation for adults over 65. The problem is that when you get to that age, unfortunately, your immune system may not be as responsive to a vaccine. Just like everything, as you get older, your immune system doesn't work as well. And so they were looking back when, to evaluate this recommendation to see if it worked. And what they found is, as I understood it at the meeting, is they found, yes, this age group are getting fewer pneumonias, but they think they're not sure if it's due to the vaccine that they're receiving or just the fact that the pneumonias, because the kids have been vaccinated, they're not exposed to it. And so that's what they were trying to figure out. And then there were some of the committee members that, actually, I would say my sense was the majority felt that we should wait and see if additional data comes. They feel like they haven't given this enough time to look at it to change that recommendation.
Okay. I can tell you why us old people don't get the flu. We never go anywhere. Anyway, it's just a thought. We're not around kids ever. We're sitting at home reading books.
This is Tamara, and I have a question. So there's pneumococcal conjugate and pneumococcal polysaccharide. So are adults over 65 recommended to get both?
That's correct.
Yes, yes. The reason is the polysaccharide actually covers 23 serotypes, and the 13 only covers the 13. As you saw, the serotype 3, even though it's in the vaccine, there's questions whether that's actually.
Any other questions?
Dr. McNeil, this is Kathy Gaffney.
Yes, yes.
I had just one question about your slide number 11.
Yes.
The question about Vexillus
Yes.
Is about Vexillus. And as I understand that, the recommendation might be for 3 doses at 2, 4, and 6 months. Currently, newborns receive hepatitis B before they leave the hospital. Would this mean they're going to receive 4 doses of hepatitis B by 6 months, or would that eliminate the newborn hepatitis B? Or do you know?
On my FDA colleague, but my understanding is, as you say, it's only going to be for those 3, 2, 4, and 6 months, and so it's not going to allow for completion of the 5 doses that you normally receive of DICP, etc. But I know you're asking about the birth dose of Hep B, and
usually we don't give it at 4 months.
Yes. Again, this is really.
It may be that it's a work in progress.
Yeah,
okay.
I think this is what the FDA have licensed it, and it's yes, it's. I think its niche will be the fact, of course, that fewer visits and fewer injections, and particularly in the children, American Indian, Alaskan Native.
Right, thank you very much. I think from here, what we'll do is circle back to the agenda item entitled lunch.
Well, those of us calling in kind of don't really have, I don't know, I don't feel like I have much right to say anything because I had a snack about a half hour ago while we were talking, and I'm going to have a cup of coffee in a minute. So I think it's up to you guys in the meeting itself. If you want a little, maybe a 10-minute break or something, I don't know. It's up to you. You're sitting in a meeting room, not us. I don't know, Alexandra, do you agree?
Yes, I agree. Whatever they want to do, because I'm perfectly fine either way.
I'd like to just keep moving because a storm is going through, and I do worry that people driving in it. And I would just assume keep moving, but that's up to you, what you want to do. Beth?
My vote would be to take at least 20 minutes on a break.
Okay. Okay.
Do we need more than that, less than that?
20's fine.
I would prefer half an hour, actually.
Okay.
If people did want to get something, I think a half an hour would be more sufficient because this is one time if people did want to go to the our little cafeteria, that would allow time to get in line, make choices, wolf down some food, whatever.
Do you still have the food truck in front of the building?
occasionally there are food trucks out in front of the building. I'm not sure if there are any today, but sometimes there are.
It's like pretty good food there. Okay, so it's 12:12, Beth. What do you want us to do?
So I would recommend that we reconvene at 12:45.
Okay. And is it the same call-in number, the same procedure?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point with the operator, we'll discontinue the call and we'll reconvene in 30 minutes.
Okay then. Bye-bye.
The call is open now and public.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
No. Okay, welcome back to everyone. All right, so just in review, so we have, I'm here, I'm Beth Luthi, Alexandra is on the call, Kathleen Gaffney is here in person, John Howie is here in person, Martha Toomey is on the call, and Cody Meisner is now on the call. Welcome, Cody.
Thank you.
We're going to make just a little bit of a change in the agenda and ask Ann Aiken from the National Vaccine Program Office to give her presentation next. Ann, are you ready?
I am. So good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Ann Aiken from the National Vaccine Program Office, and if we could go to slide 2. I'm just going to have a very brief update today. And the first thing on slide 2 I wanted to talk about is the National Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting. The next public meeting will be held virtually on March 25th of 2019. We did have to reschedule that meeting from February 5th due to the government shutdown. The agenda will be made available online once we get a little closer to the meeting. And I also wanted to let people know that we still have set 2 more meetings for the year, one in June 4th and 5th, and also September 17th and 18th of 2019. So going on to slide 3. I also wanted to let you guys know that we just, a few days ago, started what we're calling our HPV vaccination spring push. And we kicked that off on International HPV Awareness Day, which is March 4th. And we're also going to be doing special promotions throughout April. We've created some talking points, social media messages, and graphics, and we have some web tools and other materials that are available if people want to join in on our website. And then I wanted to also note that we co-sponsor the National Adult and Influenza Immunization Summit with CDC and the Immunization Action Coalition. The summit will be held this year on May 14th through the 16th at the Crown Plaza perimeter at Ravinia in Atlanta. And you can find more information about that online as well. And that concludes my update for this meeting.
Thank you, Ann. Are there any questions? All right, hearing none, we'll move forward. Thanks, Ann, for being willing to switch places really quick.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is an update from NIAID. And Barbara is here. Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, excuse me. For those of you who are just looking at the slides, you'll see Claire Schuster's name. She and I take turns giving presentations for NIAID. We work together across the street. She wasn't available today, so I was lucky enough to be able to join you. So I'm here to give an update on the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institutes of Health. And I wanted to start just by updating you. I think Claire may have mentioned this a couple meetings ago, but NIAID has been involved in a series of studies to look at an H7N9 influenza vaccine. And for those who don't know, H7N9 is an avian influenza virus that was first reported in humans in 2013 in China. Since then, there have been 6 waves of H7N9 infections in China, resulting in more than 1,500 cumulative cases and at least 615 deaths, according to the World Health Organization. So back in 2013, public health groups went about working with, we're having an issue with the speaker.
Can you guys please mute your phones? We're getting a lot of feedback.
Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, back in 2013 when those first cases reported of H7N9, public health groups as well as industry worked together to develop candidate H7N9 vaccines. And there were vaccines developed against 2013 strains. But when we looked at the more recent waves of H7N9, we found that the 2013 strain vaccines really weren't as protective as we would like them to be against the current circulating strains. So basically we've been working with partners to develop H7N9 vaccines, and so currently NIAID is testing these vaccines in clinical trials. So we have a total of 5 trials that are ongoing right now. 3 of them have completed enrollment and 2 are still recruiting participants. And there's additional information on clinicaltrials.gov if you'd like to know the specifics, but we're basically looking at 2 different vaccines, one developed by Sanofi Pasteur and the other developed by Seqirus, and we're looking at it with and without different adjuvants. The adjuvants we're looking at are AS03 and MF59, and we're also looking at sort of when you might give that vaccine in relationship to the seasonal vaccine. And many of you, if you were around thinking about this when 2009 H1N1 hit, that was one of the questions that we asked is how would you give a vaccine for a strain that might be a pandemic strain vaccine and make sure that we're not interfering with what we're doing with the seasonal vaccines. So we will have updates for you as those trial results are available. I also wanted to tell you about an update regarding evaluation of a temperature-stable experimental tuberculosis vaccine. So this vaccine was developed by the Infectious Disease Research Institute in Seattle. The name of the vaccine is ID93. And what's exciting about it is that it's freeze-dried and temperature-stable. And so one of the things we think about a lot when we're thinking about vaccines for international populations is thinking about a vaccine where you don't have to worry about issues of keeping it at a particular temperature or having it expire because it's not under the right conditions. So this is the second trial that's being conducted with this vaccine, and it also uses an adjuvant GLA-SE. So we're really excited to see the results of this trial. The first trial, the safety was very good. And we're looking in a small number of volunteers, 48 healthy adults aged 18 to 55. So again, we're happy to provide updates to know more about the results. I also wanted to draw your attention to NIH's interest in understanding more about the disease acute flaccid myelitis. For those of you who've read about it in the news, it's one of those things that kind of comes up about every other year. They see a few cases, and CDC is doing a lot of research to better understand what might be causing this disease and where it's happening and to do research on it. So several components of NIH got together to put out a notice of interest in advancing research in acute flaccid myelitis and Guillain-Barré syndrome. So the idea is to encourage research applications and requests for supplement to current ongoing activities to support research on the causes, diagnosis, prevention, or treatment of AFM, GBS, and other acute neurological conditions of muscle weakness, paralysis, triggered by infectious agents or related immune responses. So we're hopeful that the research community can work together with us to try to really build our understanding in this area. I also wanted to let you know that CDC currently has an acute flaccid myelitis task force, and NIH is part of that task force. And so we have been in ongoing discussions with our agency partners about what we can do with regard to this disease. And NIAID is also contributing by developing a research protocol for a natural history study of AFM in children. So hopefully we'll gather some more information about really what's going on in this area. I also thought you might be interested in learning about some work that's going on studying the effects of maternal opioid use in newborns. So there's an overall program at NIH called the HEAL Initiative, and there are various components of that. But this particular component talks about antenatal opioid exposure in a longitudinal study consortium. So the idea is to get institutions to submit for a data coordinating center and 2 or more clinical sites to conduct multi-center prospective cohort studies of infants exposed to opioids in utero compared to unexposed infants. And then they're going to look during a 2-year follow-up period. So again, they're going to be looking at a lot of different aspects, including neuroimaging, medical, neurodevelopmental, behavioral, and home, social, and family life assessments. And for the research community, their applications are due later this month. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you is just some information about what's going on with regard to tick-borne diseases. So as you may have seen on the CDC website or in other conversations, tick-borne diseases are really a serious and growing public health threat in the United States, with ticks transmitting at least 20 different infectious diseases, from Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and Powassan virus. To address this threat, NIH is developing a strategic plan to advance tick-borne disease research and development. And it's related to an overall tick-borne diseases working group, which is a federal advisory committee that met last year and was established by Congress. And it was comprised of physicians, researchers, patient advocates, and government representatives, including those from NIH. So the framework for our strategic plan will include basic research, diagnosis and detection, therapeutics, prevention, and resources. And so hopefully among the many areas that we're able to expand is the development of vaccines that can prevent many of these diseases. And there are also a lot of unique ways of looking at how to keep the tick from transmitting that disease further to humans, even if they are carrying it. So a lot of really interesting research in this area right now. So what we have on the street right now is called a request for information, where we're asking the public and the research community what they think our strategic plan should include. And so anyone who has ideas for us or suggestions, it's just an opportunity for you to submit that information, and if, the link should be at the bottom of the slide. And that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Are there any questions?
It's Martha. I have a question about the tick-borne disease research. I'm fascinated by it. On this committee, do we have members of Congress, any elected officials that represent areas of the country that are being particularly, the Hudson Valley, for example, has a horrible tick problem, deer ticks, Lyme disease. Are any elected officials on here?
On the Tick-Borne Diseases Advisory Group?
Yeah.
Congress is not as part of the actual advisory group, but when we have a federal advisory group that is established by Congress, we provide reports to them basically with what we found, and so we are definitely communicating the results of our discussions, and they can give us feedback at any time.
And what committee would you report to? Who are you reporting to? What congressional?
I have to look to see what committee actually that's going to, but I can share that information with ACCV members.
Okay. Well, as of today, some of us aren't going to be members, so I can find that information on the website?
Yeah, I mean, I'll send it today, and so hopefully they can share it with you.
Okay, great. Great. I'm fascinated by that. And I didn't see any information in any of our reports today on Zika, the Zika virus, and what's going on with that. Do we not have any new information on that?
I know we have several clinical trials that are ongoing with regard to Zika, but we didn't have any specific results to share with you today. But again, we'd be happy to share some links with you about where regular updated information is posted so that you can watch for that as it's available, at least for NIH.
Because I know that a lot of Zika research has been truncated because of the hurricanes. It stopped. So I wasn't sure if we had up-to-date numbers or anything. Some of the islands are no longer reporting Zika.
Yeah, I know for, I didn't include it in my update, but I know for a fact that they are monitoring the women from the Zika and infants and pregnancy study. So they're not currently enrolling new pregnant women, but the babies who were born from those pregnant women from the initial enrollments, we are continuing to follow them, and I'll look to see what updates we have that we can share with you on that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Doctor. All right, the next item on our agenda is an update from the FDA. Commander Valerie Marshall.
Good afternoon. I will provide you with a brief update on current FDA activities. As was mentioned by my colleague at CDC, the FDA recently approved VAXELIS, which is diphtheria and tetanus toxoids, and acellular pertussis absorbed inactivated poliovirus, Haemophilus B conjugate, meningococcal protein conjugate, and hepatitis B recombinant, which is called VAXELIS is the trade name. It is indicated for active immunization to prevent diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, poliomyelitis, hepatitis B, and invasive disease due to Haemophilus influenza type B. It is approved for use as a 3-dose series in children 6 weeks through 4 years of age prior to the 5th birthday. And this vaccine was approved in December of 2018. It was developed as part of a joint partnership between Sanofi and Merck. In October 2018, the FDA approved a supplement to the Biologics License application for Xario. So this vaccine was previously approved, but the sponsor came in seeking a new indication. The new indication that was approved was an alternate series of 2 0.5 ml doses administered at 7 days apart for individuals 18 to 65 years of age. And the sponsor also included an update to the package insert, which included 2.05 ml doses administered 28 days apart with licensed rabies vaccine administered for pre-exposure prophylaxis. So the package insert was updated to include these two new indications. In February 2019, the FDA approved a supplement to the Biologics License application for Fluzone Quadrivalent to include the 2019 Southern Hemisphere formulation and associated labeling revisions. On March 6, 2019, the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee met, which was a couple of days ago. They met in an open session to discuss and make recommendations on the selection of strains to be included in the influenza virus vaccines for the 2019 to 2020 influenza season. And the committee, a majority of committee members voted to follow the WHO recommendations. On yesterday, the committee met in an open session to discuss and make recommendations on the safety and effectiveness of dengue tetravalent vaccine, it's actually quadrivalent vaccine, by Sanofi Pasteur. So Sanofi Pasteur came in with the Biologics License application seeking a new vaccine approval. During yesterday's advisory committee meeting, Sanofi presented safety, efficacy, and immunogenicity data to support an indication for prevention of dengue disease caused by serotypes 1, 2, 3, and 4 for persons 9 to 45 years of age with laboratory-confirmed previous dengue infection living in endemic areas. So the committee was asked to vote on the safety and the effectiveness, and the committee votes were split for both safety and effectiveness. The committee was also asked to vote on the ages from 9 to 17. The committee voted, again, the vote was split. Well, actually 13 yeses and 1 no for the age indication of between 9 and 17. A majority of committee members voted to that the safety was acceptable in the age ranges of 9 to 17. The committee also opined on the need for rapid diagnostics for this particular vaccine. The FDA will issue a regulatory decision regarding dengue vaccine in the spring of 2019. This concludes my report.
So I believe that slide number 2 probably answered Kathleen's question from earlier, which was in the new VAXLS. Does that mean that you do away with the newborn dose of hepatitis B?
Right. So it starts at 6 weeks.
Are there any other questions? Hearing none. All right, thank you. We're at a point in the agenda where the commission and the commissioners can hear from the public. Operator, are you able to see if there are any members of the public that would like to comment at this time?
Yes, if you would like to make a comment, please press star 1 and record your first and last name. One moment, please, while we wait for comments. We do have a comment from Teresa Ragman. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Rangham, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Vaccine Information Center. Our mission is to prevent vaccine injuries and deaths through public education and to defend the informed consent ethic in U.S. vaccine policies and laws. Since the last meeting of the ACCV, Congress has held hearings on exemptions and measles. For both those hearings, MVIC contacted these committees to request an understanding of the premise of those meetings and opportunities for MVIC as an organization of standing relating to the federal law and the representation of the vaccine safety and informed consent concerns that intersect policy and law discussions. Sadly, we were told we could not submit questions or statements to the committee, and that if we submitted questions and statements, they would not be a part of the record. Additionally, we were not allowed to participate in either hearing, though MVIC has historically, for almost 4 decades, represented consumer concerns in this regard, as we did when we worked with Congress to pass the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. As a result, these hearings were very one-sided in their representation of concerns relating to current vaccine policy and laws, with no representation relating to existing and significant vaccine safety research deficits and little information on the VICP and vaccine injuries. As a result, we will go on record here where vaccine injuries to some extent are represented. As this commission well knows, those at risk for vaccine injury and death are rarely identified in advance of the administration of the vaccine. In addition, due to vaccine safety research deficits, the characterization of the mechanisms of injury are not well understood or recognized. As demonstrated by VICP awards, vaccine injuries can be lifelong and extremely debilitating, and none of that information was presented at these hearings. And we hope that this commission will explore this lack of representation. It is critical that there be balanced information and representation in such hearings, as there are risks to vaccination which were given short shrift due to the absence of this balance. Vaccine injuries and deaths are real, and the significant acknowledged vaccine safety research deficits that prevent the identification of those most at risk for vaccine injury and death should have been a part of the conversation, as well as the human right to informed consent. This lack of balance serves only to demonize, discriminate, and treat those injured by vaccines as acceptable collateral damage in the forwarding of an unrealistic one-size-fits-all policy, regardless of who is harmed. Such policy and law would discriminate against a minority that is often invisible until harmed and prevent the exercise of a basic human right of autonomy in medical risk-taking procedures. Societally, it disadvantages this minority and creates educational and possible employment barriers, as already seen in California and in some healthcare facilities. And it deprives individuals of the exercise of religion and conscience while unnecessarily pitting families against each other. It is our hope that this commission, like MVIC, has many questions about this lack of representation and its impact to trust in government and ongoing vaccine hesitancy. To be critical of vaccine law and policy doesn't necessarily equate to being anti-vaccine, and this criticism is part of a healthy government and the discharge of constitutional rights. NVIC, in closing, appreciates the efforts of the process working group in creating the VICP exit questionnaire and hopes that a retroactive look at such a questionnaire to award recipients is also considered, as recommended in previous federally commissioned reports, to examine award adequacy. Such an effort would better inform compensation going forward. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment, and I hope everybody makes it home safely.
Thank you, Teresa. As always, it's good to hear from you.
Thank you, Teresa. It made me cry. It's not hard to do lately, but I couldn't have said it any better myself. I was shocked and just terribly, terribly hurt by the vitriol of the last few weeks, and it has affected my family, and it has affected my husband, and it has been very difficult. And we have lost family members over this subject, and I couldn't have said it better myself. It's been very difficult, and the vitriol must stop. Parents have to stop being treated like the enemy. The vaccine product is a product, and we're not selling it very well. If McDonald's didn't make good hamburgers and people stopped eating at McDonald's, they wouldn't attack the customer. They would try to change the product. So thank you, Teresa. It meant a lot to me. Thank you for your work.
Operator, do we have any further public comments?
No further comments at this time.
All right, thank you. Well, we have come to the end of our meeting. Can we just kind of put out there to see if anyone has any future agenda items, or is there any new business that we need to make sure is on the agenda for our next meeting, which is tentatively scheduled in June, over the 6th and 7th?
The only agenda items I would add is that some of us will not be on the commission in the June meeting, and I expect that Annie will probably be sending us watches or some type of a watch that says ACCV or something.
Hey,
or,
you're actually on for the June meeting.
I am, okay. Okay, and we get our watches then, is that the idea?
I don't know about the watches, but...
Pens. Let's all have pens, but, so are we all going to be back at the June meeting?
We're not sure yet. You know, we try to save the in-person meetings for when we have new members. We just don't know if we'll have them in place.
Okay.
So we'll make a determination after we, come up with an agenda. And
Okay.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you, Beth.
Any other business or future agenda items before we adjourn? All right, hearing none, then I just need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved. It's Alexandra.
Thank
Second.
you.
Martha.
And
Second.
Thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, everybody travel safe and take care, and I will plan on seeing you, whether that's in person or by telephone, in June.
Okay. Be careful. Take the subway.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This now concludes today's conference. All lines may disconnect at this time. Leaders, please stand by for your post-conference.